Christy from Fellow Creatures Pets. In this trainer spotlight, I'll be interviewing Peter Amelia from Taking Wing Consulting. Besides both of us being animal trainers, we share an interest in reptiles. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us your name, pronouns, and pets.
Awesome. Hi. So I'm so excited to be here. It's really, really fun to talk with other people who are as nerdy as me. So yeah, I'm Peter Amelia. I go by they them pronouns. The pets would take up the rest of the podcast to discuss. My roommate is also we've been best friends for a long time, and she's also an animal trainer. And between the two of us, we have tortoises, snakes, lizards, tarantulas, goats, dogs, pigeons, ducks, chickens, partridges, finches, so many parrots. We have a couple of doves that we're fostering right now. We just got two kittens, Sphinx kittens. They're amazing. I love them. I'm also a licensed falconer, so I have a bird of prey as well.
Wow, what kind of
Yeah,
pet do you have? I'm curious.
he's a hybrid gerfalcon. So he's a gerfalcon, saker falcon cross. Yeah.
Ooh, that's cool. What kind of work do you do with animals in terms of like
Yeah.
or training with your own pets? Tell us about that.
My other job is I'm a circus artist, so a contortionist and coach. So for the last few years, that has really kind of taken the precedence in terms of like my professional time. So I haven't been doing as much animal training professionally. I still do consult. I really love consulting for facilities. I also really enjoy working with a lot of pet owners as well. And especially seeing the trend of like more pet owners and companion animal owners being interested in moving towards more welfare-based interactions with their animals, especially with like we've discussed, like species that oftentimes get left out of that conversation, like reptiles, and to a lesser extent, gratefully now birds are. There's more discussion around how do we interact with birds in a way that is lower stress and more welfare and health based. And of course, we still have a long way to go in even the animals who have more of that, like dogs specifically. But we're getting there. We're moving forward. We're learning more. We're turning the tides, which I think is good.
Yeah, and that's what this conversation is all about.
Yeah.
So, how did you get started in all of that animal training, consulting type of work?
So, as far as animal training, and just animals in general, like the story I like to tell is that there was literally a cat on the back of the midwife while I was being born. So that's how animals like started in my life. So we always had, pets growing up. I got my first bird when I was about 8. And it was just a budgie, or what's often called like a parakeet griffin, and he really instilled this love for me in birds and training. And so then I ended up with like a flock of like 7, and they were all trained to do different recalls and behaviors like that. And so that's kind of how I really got started. And I do credit budgies actually. I really credit them to a lot of my successes as a trainer because I quickly learned to move really fast because they're quick little birds. And then also training a flock of 7 at the same time, maintaining a rate of reinforcement for all of them is a whole adventure. So that's how I kind of got started with training, got interested in free flying training, which I really enjoy. Like, it's just really complicated and really works my brain in terms of like, how do we do this in the safest and best way? And it's also really fun. I think as a kid, I wanted to be a zookeeper, and then I realized no, I really want to do this like training thing. And yeah, I guess that's kind of. I hope that answers your question. I just do it now.
Like you got started early and animals have always been a part of your life.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you fell in love
absolutely.
with training because of your experience with the budgies. And
Yes.
that got you to where you are today. That's so
Yeah.
cool.
One thing I'd like to mention is that I learned what I would now consider the wrong way first. When I was a kid, I had a terrier, and like I look back with like a lot of regret. Granted, I was very young. We went to a dog training facility and they told us a certain way to do things. And I remember even as a kid being like, this feels wrong. I don't like this. I totally wish I could do a do-over with Connor. And towards the end of his life, I definitely started shifting things. I used to clip birds, clip their wing feathers when I was younger, and I don't do that now. I'm a huge advocate against wing clipping.
It's always hard when you're growing up and your family tells
Yeah,
you that this is the way that it's done because that's the
right,
knowledge that they have at the time. And so that's what
right.
they pass on to you. We do the best we can with the resources and knowledge we have at the
Yeah.
time. And we hope that as animal trainers, we are continuing to improve, learn, and
Hmm.
grow and make those resources available to others so they
Hmm.
can begin their learning journey a little bit sooner.
Absolutely.
And hopefully
Absolutely.
also pay for our professional services if they find themselves needing more in-depth assistance,
Yeah.
not looking
Yes.
online for random bad advice, because there's a lot of
Yeah.
definitely going to be people out there who say like, "Oh, I've grown up with this animal my whole life, therefore I am an expert," and take my
Yes.
advice, and it doesn't always translate.
This kind of concept of like, well, I've been doing this for a long time. I think it's actually a really dangerous a mindset, right? Just because that's how we've done it doesn't mean we should keep doing it that way. Especially in the reptile community, there's, as Susan Friedman would say, there's a lot of cultural fog around what is appropriate, what's healthy, and how to move forward and how to interpret the research. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the same way that we're asking our animals to be consistent in the behavior that we're asking for is through really thorough reinforcement. And a lot of those ideas, concepts, and behaviors that these people have that we want to shift also have really serious reinforcement backgrounds with all of their behaviors.
Yeah,
And now you and I might be able to look at that and be like, okay, well, there's some superstition that you're experiencing right there. We don't actually have that accurate data, but that in itself can be difficult for people to kind of wrap around. So keeping in mind that like we're always learning, we're always training and always being trained by our environment and trying to have grace and also keep yourself like in a healthy space
right. Yeah.
is very real.
For sure. Like choosing how we engage with people that seem to be completely ignorant. There's ways we
Right.
can engage with them patiently and offer them educational resources. And then there's also a time when you need to draw a line and be like, okay, you're persisting in your ignorance.
Right.
If I keep engaging with you, I'm going to deplete my own energy and
Yes.
resource.
Yeah.
So I need to move on from this conversation to where
Yeah.
is actually open to working with me.
It's very easy for me to get trapped in this. Like, there's no point, there's no hope. But we're not going to change any minds that way and improve any lives, human or animal otherwise. I've had things where I've heard the saying or the phrase or the suggestion a million times, but it just happened, the stars happen to be aligned and I can hear it that day. And kind of coming to this moment I have had with people where I'm like, today the stars are not aligned for you to hear what I'm saying, and so we're gonna move on.
Yeah,
And this can be
yeah,
I've done my part. This can be someone else's opportunity
yeah, yeah.
to to try to modify this thinking that's going on. And especially, I think in the reptile world is really hard, and is one of the reasons I haven't been doing as much reptile work as I would like to. Is just because it got a little draining to be advocating for the ability for snakes to rectilinearly position themselves in their enclosure when we have this narrative of, well, they've always been okay in Rubbermaid, so let's just keep them that way, kind of thing, where
Mm,
I really want to see movement away from that.
yeah,
And that can be hard.
yeah.
So
And I think that's where there's so much power, like you said, in community. And that's why we're
yeah.
having discussions like this so that
Yes.
we can all join our voices together and say, hey, the welfare of these animals really matters. There have been some big advances, like you said, in animal welfare in recent years, but outside of zoos, concern
Mm,
for welfare seems to end with mammals and birds. And fish and reptiles are more like, decorative specimens,
yeah.
as opposed to living creatures that actually enrich our lives and have needs that need to be met.
Right.
So, what is your experience around that? Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. If we narrow the topic to more like positive reinforcement based training, the marine mammal training world is really where that picked up a lot of steam. And I think initially the goal wasn't always necessarily an improvement of welfare. I don't think we used that word was around as much as it is now. It was more about like how do we make this feasible, right? Like we can't put a shock collar on a whale or a dolphin, right? So how are we going to ask this animal to do X, Y, and Z with limited ability to control them? So that's where I think a lot of this initially started. Karen Pryor is a big deal of this too. When she came out with Don't Shoot the Dog, was when the dog world started to be a little bit more interested in. And then I think a lot with the zoos too was a goal of now we want to be more dedicated to preserving these creatures And a polar bear who's not healthy is less likely to make babies. So, we need to protect the species. So, how do we move forward that? Oh, well, enrichment and positive reinforcement training. And how do we do an ultrasound? Can we train this baboon to move its belly to the side of the enclosure and then we don't have to go in there and all that kind of thing? So, I think that that's where it picked up. Birds really, in a lot of ways, only recently became a part of the conversation, and reptiles are starting, and there's definitely some cool stuff being done with fish as well, but certainly not in the companion animal world. The reptile world is picking up, which I really credit a lot to a dear friend of mine, Carrie Davis. She was one of the co-founders of Reptiligence. I had the pleasure of getting to work with her for a while on Reptiligence. She did a lot of really important and amazing work bringing the concept of puzzle feeding and target training, especially with snakes. I think there's something about them not having legs that I think makes people really hard to relate to them. One of the zoos that she worked at had a reptile show, and a lot of the reptiles did behaviors. The tegu walked across the stage, the tortoise went for walks and did target training and all this stuff. But when the snake came out, it was just someone holding a snake and walking around. And aside from that stark difference, we also saw like people not paying attention the same way to the snake. And of course, as you and I, people who really love snakes and reptiles, we want the whole world to share that with us. I want people to be interested and focused, and clearly just carrying a snake around and holding it and maybe letting people like pet it a little bit wasn't doing that. And so that's when she and her partner at the time started working on the snake tree and having the snake move around on different objects. And I believe even targeting in front of people and crating voluntarily, those all became those much more interesting to people, especially in a zoo environment. There's a lot of focus on education, as there should be. You need them to at least stand still for a second to look at the animal. And if they're not doing that, we can't get much buy-in. And I've seen that change like a lot of people's minds about snakes, watching them get to move in a deliberate way with an intention, as opposed to this concept of very robotic, dangerous creatures.
We're really good at recognizing what's different. The more different it is from us, whether that's a
Mm-hmm.
person with a different identity or a different species, it seems like the further
Yeah,
difference we get, the more
right.
we have a hard time relating to them.
Especially with like snakes. That's like totally a thing. It's weird. It's different. And I'm also a big spider person. And when people tell me they don't like spiders, and I was like, well, and they're like, oh yeah, they're just so weird. And I'm like, dude, the blueprint for a myglomorphic spider has been around for 380 million years. If anyone's weird, it's monkeys and humans. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's I think where the weirdness comes from. So we want to talk about weird. Let's talk about humans. Yeah, I think it's very natural and unfortunate in a lot of scenarios. From a circus standpoint, from a performance standpoint, I can do a lot of really deeply flexible poses and people will find them impressive, but sometimes the thing that will get the biggest cheer when I'm performing is a split. And I can literally fall asleep in a split. Like it's not like it's I'm not saying it's not impressive to people or it's not something that is easy. I'm just saying that in the grand scheme of things that I do while I'm performing, that's the most boring thing to me. But I think when you get to a certain level of, at least in performance, of extremeness, there loses this ability to reference yourself doing it. And so I think that they lose, like audience members lose the connection,
Mhm.
right? But I think everyone's like, slipped while they were walking and gone into a quarter of a split and been like, whoa, that was crazy. Look at me, I did a split. And then been like, my hips hurt now, right? Whereas the biggest response I just get whenever they see me do even what I would consider a simple back bend is like, oh my God, my back hurts looking at that. Right. And so I think that that kind of is the case with animals. But I think in terms of the further we get, like you said, the further we get away from our ability to relate or the similarities, the harder it is for people to have buy-in or interest. And especially in the animal's welfare, I think everyone's going to look at a dog in a certain situation chained up and be like, oh, that's bad. But then people will look at a fish or a reptile in a context that I would consider pretty awful, and they don't necessarily view it the same. We need to start talking about what acceptable and optimal are so that we can start shifting that, not to make everyone feel awful about themselves every time they see something.
I think of that oftentimes when I see bettas and cups at pet stores because it's like
Yes.
if the equivalent of this would be like keeping puppies in crates for literally weeks at a time. And we do this with the fish, and maybe we change their water, maybe we feed them, or maybe they live in that cup for a month and then they die. And we would
Yeah.
never tolerate
Yeah.
something like that with dogs.
Yeah, but if you don't have that education, then maybe you and I wouldn't think that was a big deal. There was a video on YouTube I saw once, and I generally don't post a lot or despite how I write the posts in my head and even sometimes on the Facebook comment or the YouTube comment and then delete them because I'm like, it's not going to help. I'm just going to get more wound up about it and then I won't be useful to anyone, let alone myself. There was a person who did an entire instructional video on how to put your bird back in the cage, and the way that they chose to do it was by lifting them by the head
What the heck?
into the cage. Yes, a very popular bird trainer. But then this person went on to talk about the anatomy of a parrot's head, so it makes it okay. And I was like, I don't see how anyone could look at this and think this is okay.
Okay, yeah. They've used the same line of argument for scruffing cats. They were like,
Yeah,
how a mother cat picks up kittens. Like, yeah, but you're not a mother cat, and you
yeah,
need to pick up your cat this way. And have you
right,
seen the body language that goes with it when you have
right.
cats this way?
There are things that are warranted in an emergency setting, and those things are also not okay necessarily in a daily
Yeah,
practice.
yeah.
I've got a whole dog situation going on right now. She got through a gate that I really needed her not to go through, and so I grabbed whatever fur I could, and I felt awful, but I was like, okay, now we need to take a step back and we need to look at how do I manage this in a way that that doesn't happen again, whether through training or just, environmental management and having a clear plan. For me, it really comes down to education. Scruffing a cat is not cool, right? That's very obvious to you and I. To someone whose mom showed them that from day one, might not see that as obvious.
So how do we create opportunities for people to have
Mm,
those moments of connection and realization? Because you were
yeah.
talking about how both of us, we obviously had environments growing up that
Mhm.
made those kinds of connections and that kind of thinking possible, that we would just
Right.
realize, oh, you obviously wouldn't do this to
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you wouldn't do this. How can we create those opportunities for others?
Yeah, I think that that is $1 million question. I think there's just a lot of ways to approach it. The way that I tend to approach it is, it sounds kind of conceited to say, but leading by example. Don't get me wrong. I sometimes offer advice when I'm not asked, which I'm trying not to do, but it's very hard. My brain goes a mile a minute and I have feelings and I want to share the feelings sometimes, and that's not always appropriate. So, there's learning for me to do in that context. Outside of being asked directly, what do you think I should do with my pet? I try to just do what I think is the best thing in front of people and maybe mention why I'm doing the thing I'm doing,
I like that.
right? And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work as smoothly as I would like it to. There's behavior and consequences happening all the time, constantly. And I think that constantly aspect provides us with a lot of opportunities to work toward the shift that we think is really important. I've had a lot of really cool opportunities to do that kind of thing with people, even just at their house and how I'm interacting with their dog, their cat, or their bird, or whatever. I never shut up about animals. They know I love animals. And so when I go over to their house, I think there's kind of this expectation that I'm just going to beeline for the bird. Birds don't like that, generally speaking. And so I will generally ignore most animals for a while. And I've had people be like, well, don't you want to meet the bird? And I was like, oh, yeah, if he wants to, then yeah. And sometimes they're like, oh, okay, well, yeah, here, do you want to offer him a snack? And I'd love to. Or I get a bird dumped on me. And I'm just like, oh, great, now I'm holding this bird and neither of us are comfortable. Awesome. The school that I teach circus at is on a fairly popular street. It's people walking their dogs constantly. And most of the time I have to look away because I'll be like, oh, I don't like how they're holding that leash. I have to pace myself for that kind of thing. I have friends and people who every time they see a dog, they have to stop everything they're doing and run over to that dog. And I'm just like, look, I like dogs. Don't get me wrong. Do I want to pet that greyhound? 110%. But I'm also not going to like stare at that dog. I'm not going to run over to that dog. I'm probably not even going to ask the owner if I can pet it. For all I know, it's a really well adjusted dog, but for all I know, it's not a well adjusted dog. And even if it is a well adjusted dog, it's outside. There's construction happening. There's people walking around. There's cars. There's honking. Someone drops a plate. There's a lot going on, and I'm putting both of us in what could be a very precarious situation. And I want to be mindful that I'm not doing that to the best of my ability. I really try not to force it and I'm not always good at this, but I try not to just tell people what to do. I try to just kind of show them what I'm doing. And sometimes that works out and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes I end up in a very like circular conversation that happens weekly about why I think their cats should not be let outside all the time. So sometimes that's the case. Sometimes that's just not a battle I'm going to win, and that's okay. Hopefully things go well.
Yeah, and then you got to do your self-care and detach
Uh-huh.
outcomes that you cannot control.
I was teaching the other day and someone sent me a picture of their snake, which is like it's a really cool snake. And I just had to say out loud to the whole room. So I was like, should I tell this person their snake's overweight? How do I tell them their snake is fat? Like I was just like I just immediately had to like spit it out of my mouth so that I didn't end up immediately just responding to this really nice, sweet gesture that someone sent me a photo of their snake. And my first thing was like their longevity of the snake is at risk. Like but then that turned into kind of a cool opportunity with my class where they were like, oh, wait, snakes can get fat. And I'm like, let me tell you, and then I start talking about obesity and reptiles and the issues with it and how it happens and all that kind of thing. Actually, a really cool example of that is around Halloween, there are these synthetic spider webs. It's a fairly serious wildlife hazard. Animals can get stuck in them a lot. My work, like, were so tired of me one year because I found this photo of a screech owl stuck in one, and it
Oh,
was like a warning about not using them, and I just plastered it all over the street where our work is on because during Halloween they all put these spider webs up and I couldn't handle it. And the next year almost no one did. But everyone was like, oh my God, like Peter, you're being like a lot right now. I'm like, I can't handle it. But what was interesting, I had just mentioned that in a class because it was Halloween time, and a friend of mine writes blogs and she was writing a blog about decorations. She came to me like, oh, by the way, I added a warning about the dangers of the spider webs. And I was like, oh my God, that's so cool. Like, that is how I want things to happen. Like, I want it to be organic. And I wasn't like, hey, you're writing a blog, make sure you put this in.
right.
Right. It was her being like, I'm doing this. I have this opportunity to tell people that this is a risk to animals. I like birds. And then here's the other thing, had I posted a picture of a snake stuck in one, maybe that wouldn't have had the impact as I did this owl,
Yeah.
which don't get me wrong, it was a horrifying photo, but I mean, the owl was okay after it.
It sounds like you're trying to consider when you have teachable moments and opportunities that you can
Yeah,
influence people and also trying to balance that with like not going too far and
right.
driving people.
Because then that can work in the opposite direction. Well, I met this positive reinforcement trainer, and they told me that if I don't use a clicker, that I'm not a good trainer. And but and even if that's not what the person said, we can't always control how they take it. But I think being a skilled communicator is really important. And part of being a skilled communicator is not hurting your cause.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for people to get frustrated when they try something and it doesn't
Yep.
work initially, and we jump to conclusions a little too quickly. We have a
Yeah.
bad experience with trying to clicker train and then give up on
Hmm.
positive reinforcement altogether. So if
Right.
we know that we are that person's first point of contact, doing everything we can to help make
Yeah.
it easy for them to be successful and have a positive experience so they'll be open to
Hmm.
trying other
Yeah.
things in the future.
We want to do everything we can. And I think sometimes everything we can is actually not necessarily a lot. And sometimes it even shouldn't be. There's a vet clinic. They brought a bunch of their vets and techs and even some of their reception staff out to my property. And we trained animals all day and taught them about positive reinforcement. It was really, really cool. And I also did like a reptile presentation for them that also was really, really cool. They're an exotics vet, obviously. And one thing that one of the vets told me, she was like, I'm actually encouraging people to start trying to go more bioactive, and she's like, the reason I'm is not because I think bioactive is magic. She's like, it's because my hope is that if I can get people doing something where they have to do a little bit more research and a little bit more thinking, and then the environment that their animal is pretty and nice to look at, they're going to look at their animal more often and then notice, oh, it's kind of sluggish today, and then bring it into the vet, and then, and then get it addressed. And I was like, that is such a great way to almost passively encourage better welfare. And especially coming from a vet, it was just really heartening to hear that.
I love that because it's not more work on the vet to
Yeah,
give the person more education or resources,
right,
instilling in them the desire to do
right.
that. And my other job is I'm a coach for teens and young adults, so like a life coach. And
Oh,
one
cool.
of the things I've found from that is that you're going to have way more influence on people if you can help them to discover the answer for themselves rather than
Mm,
giving them the answer, because
yes.
what you think is the answer might not be the answer that's right for them, or
Right.
they have to discover it themselves to
Right.
really latch onto it and internalize it. And that's what I love so much about what your vet said with the bioactive situation.
Yeah.
It's putting the ownership on them, and when they're
Yeah.
invested in that, then they're going to be
Yeah.
more likely to pay attention
Absolutely.
to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, why would somebody want to do training with reptiles?
I really love training sessions. So most of my interactions with my animals are based around training. I think for people who are deeper into it, like you and I, there's a lot of really obvious answers. We want our animals to be what we would describe as happier. We want them to be healthier. We want them to move around more. We want them to feel better, right? However, we want to measure that. But I think initially, I want things to be really fun. I want things to be really, really cool and exciting. Of course, I want the animal's life to improve, but generally, those things go hand in hand.
Mhm.
So if I can encourage someone to start, honestly, even just watching their animals more can improve the animals' lives, can get the people to have more appreciation for the animal that they have. And to my vet's point, pay more attention, notice things that are going wrong sooner, all that kind of thing. So if we can even get there, and one of the great ways to do that, back to like what Carrie so phenomenally noticed and did with the snakes, was when she started offering more enrichment for the animals, even just in their exhibits, moving more, they saw people standing there watching them longer, right? And doing more. And that's fun. Like, especially if someone has a pet snake, hopefully they like snakes, right? I love snakes, but I'm only going to watch a snake sit and bask or its head poke out of a box for so long, you know? I'm more likely to shirk all my other responsibilities if the snake's moving around. And so anytime that we can start having improving some more movement in a reptile and something like that, then that's when I start to be like, okay, now let's talk a little bit about operant conditioning and how do we start to like get some more clearer communication and behaviors going with this creature. It's very, very common for dog trainers to be like, I had this really aggressive Malinois because I didn't know what I was doing and I got a Malinois. And now it's trying to attack people. So then I had to become a trainer. And then I found out that I liked training, right? So necessity is kind of where it started. Or I know some horse people will be like, this horse would not take this medication. I could not get this medication into it. And then my trainer said to tweak its ear, and now I can't get anywhere near it. And then we're like, okay, now let's talk about some ways for them to like do it in a more positive way. And then they're like, oh, actually, it worked. That was really exciting, really rewarding. I can medicate my horse now and I don't have to, try to manhandle this 1,500-pound animal. What else can we do with it? So sometimes just like a little bit of buy-in, I think, is really important, and fairly easy to get in most of the time. I think with reptiles, a huge part of it is, right, like we talked about that cultural fog, to quote Susan Friedman, that they just don't do a lot. They don't think, they don't feel, they don't need to come out of their enclosure. They don't need to have a more varied diet. They don't actually have to, XYZ, right? So that's where it's kind of like, how do we get people to start acknowledging that it's more important? So I think sometimes the first way we have to do that is we have to buy into what will work for them and make them want to keep doing it.
So, what are some examples of what training looks like with
Yeah. It looks different than almost any other kind of training that I see with other animals. Part of that is I have worked with a lot of birds, and not all, but a lot of birds are very fast paced, very fast movers. My roommate has a Jack Russell, right? Very fast mover. I've worked with like corvids and a lot of really quick moving animals. Generally, with reptiles, they're just not as fast, right? And that makes sense. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong. So for me, the hardest part initially was the pacing
Mm.
and trusting that a training session can involve only 3 reps and learning is still happening versus 100 reinforcers delivered to a bird in a 10-minute training session. That's probably, honestly, I reinforce heavier than that sometimes. The other thing is too is like generally with most animals we use food as reinforcers and as rewards for training. And with reptiles, I think there's this kind of concept that, oh, they don't eat very often, so how can you train them? Well, You can. It's going to look different. It's going to take probably a little longer to see the end of your shaping plan, but it can work. You're going in the direction you want to. But if you watch the training session, the lizard moved maybe 10 inches, and you're like, after 4 reps of a target, and you're like, how is that anything? Right. But then the next time it moves 15, and then the next time it moves 2, and then the next time it moves 30. That I think is like one of the main differences, right? Is just like the pacing. I think that was one of the harder parts, at least in terms of just shifting my brain. And it taught me a lot about training other animals as well and training other people and how to pace myself.
You mentioned two big differences of one is the timing of things,
Hmm.
and another is the quantity of food reinforcers that you can
Right,
deliver is gonna
right,
look different depending on what species
right.
you're working with. I guess also the kinds of cues you can give, because
Yes.
you can use verbal cues and gestures for
Hmm.
dogs and probably for birds as well to
Yep.
a large extent, but for snakes, you're not gonna say sit over there and then they're gonna
Yeah.
hear like,
You're not going to say back up and they walk back. Yeah.
yeah.
I will say snakes hear better than we think they do, but certainly not a way a bird, a human, or a dog does. I use a lot of visual cues even with them, with all of the animals I train. With the snakes, I do visual cues, but they tend to be larger and much slower and more deliberate. I did a consult once with this little corn snake that this person was really struggling with, and they just wanted the snake moved to a new enclosure. They were like, well, the snake is really afraid of me. I don't want to stress it out. And I'm like, valid. Okay. And so I actually went over there and I was like, do you want me to walk you through it or do you want me to just do it? And they were like, well, why don't you just do it? Because I'm like stressed about it. I was like, totally valid. I'll do it. And so I did it, moved very, very slow, walked the tub it was in and moved it to another space. And it was a little baby corn snake. And I got it on my hand, I think, for a moment as I was moving it. And it was just really slow. It really evenly tongue flicked the whole time. It didn't tense or flick its tail. I think I got one pull back with the head just initially when I bumped into something. There's a part of me that I was like, okay, this went fine. I was kind of like, this snake doesn't strike me as a snake that's really stressed out. And the person's response was, so I should move really slowly with this one. And I was like, yeah, I would move really slow. And then she ended up being really successful with them. Sometimes it's something as simple as that, just to slow your pacing down and not scare them. I have two leopard tortoises, and one of them is pretty shy, the other one, not at all. You have an ounce of a wrong move, and Storm pulls her head in. Rogue, she will do like a little head movement, and you can buy yourself some time. You can pause for a second and then move forward. Storm, not so much. So, but as far as cues go, I think large, slow cues, and then finding, like you said, the relevance for them. Lizards can hear, well, most of them can hear, a verbal cue you could use. I don't know that it would be overly relevant for them. I've tried to work on conditioning one bearded dragon to a clicker. The marker he held on to was actually just the removal of the target as his mark for reinforcements delivered. There's been some discussion around how to use odors as cues. I've never really tried. I would anticipate them to be a little hard to manage,
Yeah.
especially because we can't smell
We
them.
don't spell them that well.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm curious about how salient, how clear we can make that cueing. And if like you rubbed that scent on something, does that snake now for the next 3 days think food's coming and I don't want to put my hand in that cage? I think that one would be cool if you had just an animal who didn't come out of its hide or out of its burrow very often. What I've done with a spider, I just kept a chopstick by her cage and I went tap, 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 roach, tap, 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 roach every time I fed her. And it got to the point where I would actually delay the roach and she would come out of the burrow after she heard the tapping.
Nice.
I mean, and with spiders, vibrations, that's how they experience the world and hunt a lot. So it made sense for me to do that. Flashes of light, I think, could totally be effective. Now, with my tortoises, I have a red and a blue target, and I want to keep working on like the blue being assigned to one of them and the red being assigned to the other one. But I want to make sure that that blue is really clear to the one that it's theirs, that they
Right.
can see, and they're not going just by the shape.
So you use a lot of targeting when you're
A
doing
lot of targeting,
with
yeah.
reptiles.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with Stephanie Edlund. She's a really great bird trainer and she has done a lot of different reptile stuff as well. She made the point to me once that I thought was very astute was that kind of all behaviors we ask for if they involve movement is a target. A dog sitting is a dog targeting its butt to the ground. There's a world where if you look at it as everything as a target, that's helped me break down a lot of things and being like, where am I actually asking them to orient and which part of their body am I asking them to orient it to?
Mhm.
In general, with most of the reptiles, most of what I do is targeting. For the bearded dragon, I used one of those little puppy Kongs on a chopstick as a target, partially because I think he would struggle to swallow it because he likes to chew on his targets. With snakes, I took a peanut butter can lid, drilled 2 holes through it, and stuck a really strong straw through it so that it was almost like a stop sign kind of thing. And so I wanted it to be a really large, relevant target. And that was just like also a thing they couldn't swallow. The other thing I've used with like lizards, tortoises that you could probably also use with a snake actually is just like an elevated surface. One of my favorite things to have trained in terms of just like a management is actually a crating behavior. It doesn't necessarily always look the same way that it would for like a dog, where like open the door, dog goes in the crate, dog gets a snack. I generally don't involve food in crating. I tend to involve non-food reinforcers. My indigo snake really loves boxes and crumpled up thick paper. So I've actually just shown him the crate that I want him to go into, and then I just like toss a box in, and he's like, "Oh!" And then he goes in there, and I mean, I struggled to get him out of the crate. Carrie and I taught a lot in our snake training course is what I call snake in a box or a box of stuff. Literally, I used like a large Rubbermaid and I just filled it with all the weirdest crap I could find around the house that was too big for them to swallow and just fill it and show them the box. And oftentimes I end up with a snake crawling around for a box for an hour. Then while they're doing that, I can clean the enclosure. I can, do whatever I need to. I can also just watch them play with stuff, which is like the funnest thing. Sometimes to get them back, I have to throw a few of the things in there. I had a sombrero from the dollar store once that I used for a while. Carrie's Walnut Python really liked the sombrero. That's one thing too that I really learned from Carrie is to not be afraid of non-food reinforcers when it comes to reptiles. I haven't had a lot of experiences with snakes that were really interested in tactile from me, but I've definitely known a good chunk of tortoises who were really into having their butt scratched and would like lean in and rub their own butt. That one I don't use as often just because it's a little hard to tell if they're like actually excited about it. I will use that if they already started doing it. And then I'll be like, okay, now let's use this as a part of a shaping plan.
Those are some really good examples. One of my next questions was going to be like, what are some of the benefits? And I was also going to touch on birds because you do a lot of work with birds. Started into some of that already with your description of like, you can train them to go into a carrier so that you can clean their enclosure,
Mm-hmm.
have enrichment and explore.
Yeah.
You also mentioned some of the reptiles don't totally dig the tactile interaction.
Right.
So you can have more consent-based interaction.
Right.
And that's going to be safer for people. They're not going to get bit as often. And
Right.
observing their animals more, they're going to notice if something's wrong, if they're sick, they can
Right.
cooperative care procedures.
Right.
What other benefits can you think of like why is it good to be training our animals?
I think one of my favorites was Storm. My tortoise I mentioned was really shy. When I first got her, she was pretty shy. We got her way less shy. She was a freaking awesome little training buddy. And then she ended up with some health issues. I mean, she needed injections twice a day, and it was just kind of like it was very immediate. I didn't really feel like I had a lot of opportunity to try and make it as positive as I could. She had to be nebulized. It was the whole thing. Ever since then, we've had a really hard time getting her back to where she was. But before actually at the vet visit where we found out we started to be doing all this stuff, I was targeting her on the veterinary table, and the vet commented, "Oh my gosh, I can just see the inside of her mouth. I don't have to stick a plastic thing in it to open it up." And I was like, "Yes, this is exactly what I want. This was totally my plan." And yeah, she targeted all over the place, and I could target her up, so she actually stood up, so you didn't have to try and pull her leg out. Which, when you want a tortoise leg, especially a bigger tortoise like a leopard, you might not get it if you're, really trying. So that is one of the things, right? Like even in a veterinary standpoint, you can end up with a much easier, less stressful for everyone, right? The vets work really hard. They don't need to have to try and yank a leg out of a tortoise, and then the tortoise isn't having a good time. And I hate watching it. Right now, my retic, she's got some kind of a bacterial infection that we're fighting, and she has to be on injections every few days. She also has to take some betadine baths for like a little scrape that she got. But having her be as kind of friendly and interactive as she is has been really helpful because we have a long history of training. Despite him having to do all this really unfun stuff to her, she still wants to come out of the enclosure. She wants to kind of curl up around me in my lap and spend a lot of time there, even after I just kind of had to give her a betadine bath that she certainly doesn't like. And so even if it's not like an active training, having that build up can go a long way with them in the future. So overall, better relationship is definitely a big one. Definitely finding a way to monitor their health better with less stress for everyone.
That might be a good way to wrap up. So, can you tell us
Yeah,
a story about something you have learned from your animals?
attention to detail, I think, is actually a huge one. I'm really interested in movement, as you can probably tell by the fact that I'm like circus artist. With reptiles, they can be so still, so still. And so you end up marking and reinforcing like twitches of muscle that you're looking for, or you're using a twitch of a muscle to tell yourself you need to back up, right? So I think attention to detail is probably the biggest thing that I think I've learned from animals.
And I can see how
Yeah,
an outside observer would see that as being complete magic, but it's really
right.
you're tuned in to these things
Yes.
because of the years of practice and working
And
with
I'm still never going to be as good at it as a border collie or a bird or like they're just whenever I think about how good I think I am at observing behavior, I'm always humbled when I watch animals. They're way better than we are.
they are evolutionarily primed to pick up on those
Yeah,
things, aren't they? Well, this has been so much fun, and I think it's going to be really enlightening for people and interesting to hear, that reptiles not only can be trained, but that it's beneficial and it benefits them and it benefits us. And so it's really important to start up this conversation about, hey, let's take a look at their welfare and give them a better life because it's more interesting for us as well. Where can people find you or relevant resources about
yeah,
reptile and bird training?
yeah. So for me, I'm on Instagram and Facebook, Taking Wing Consulting. And then we haven't been very active. There is a reptile training group that Carrie started, and then I helped run for a while. But again, we've been really, really inactive on it. But it's called Reptile Enrichment and Training, RET, RET. On Instagram, it's Reptile Intelligence rather than Reptelligence, which is a
Ah,
bummer, but that's what it is. So there's some resources on there. So, that's pretty much how you find me.
that's awesome. Thank you so much for your time and
Thank you.